All right, so the final part of this would be kind of what I would call maybe the Marxist apologetics, or the ways that perhaps Marxism didn't work out the way that he thought. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is Marx was writing in the early 1800s, and the human sciences are very complex. Human society is very complex. You wouldn't expect someone in 1830 to have figured out every variable of the economy such that he or she could predict what's going to happen in 100 years. Talk about hubris! It's kind of ridiculous. But that doesn't mean that there isn't food for thought and some decent analytical tools that go with Marx there. Um, One of the ways that I think Marx was uh, probably didn't see is while there were shares in things at the time, there were not there weren't corporate shares the way that that we have them now. So if you go get a job and you get a 401k and you start to dump your money in the S&P 500, right? When you start making investments in shares, you're actually being a little bit of a capitalist yourself, right? You don't necessarily have to start a business to own a business, because if you buy shares in AT&T, shares in Oracle, you own a tiny slice of those companies, and when they are profitable, you'll you'll get a small dividend on them. And if everybody actually had, a little bit of the American economy in their 401k, and that's what they retired on, that's not exactly what Marx was thinking of when he thought about the peasants, the proletariat rising up and taking over ownership. But it is a kind of an interesting spin on ownership that I don't, that I think is just kind of a clever and interesting way of looking at it. So there is a little bit of shared ownership there for perhaps working people. Now, whether or not it's actually working all that well for American workers, it's a political discussion for later. The second thing, yes, obviously Hitler was a bad dude, um, but I'm always a little befuddled when folks who folks who want to, like I said, be a Marxist apologetics. When, but I do think this is actually kind of interesting when rulers have, when political leaders have actually followed openly Marxist teachings. Um, it's amazing to me the amount of death and mayhem that follows in their wake. Stalin, I mean, maybe Chad GPT knows, but Stalin has millions and millions and millions of deaths to his name, um, and I hope I don't get the details wrong here, because I think both him and Mao did similar things and caused similar problems. Um, but when Stalin came to power and said he was going to introduce a Marxist economy for the Soviet Union, they collectivized the farms, right? Collective ownership. The people who ended up on the farms didn't know how to work them, and what ended up resulting was they call it the Holodomor, I believe, and it's a great famine which killed millions of people, and that was just one part of the people that Stalin was responsible for. And then it wasn't as if the Soviet Union through the 60s, 70s, and 80s was a bastion of freedom and happy living. Um, and then you see the same thing with Mao. When Mao decided he was going to be, that China was going to be communist, he too, there was the great, uh, boy, I'm brain farting on the name. But there was a similar thing. There was a collectivization of the farms. The brainy, overly liberal intellectuals from the city got sent out to the countryside and had to work the farms. Well, of course, these intellectual city kids didn't know anything about farms, and so again, you had a tremendous a tremendous starving, which again, millions of people, and then also again, in order to keep his leadership position, uh, it's Mao's leadership was pretty brutal, and so I'm always a little curious when people who would openly say that Hitler was a bad guy because he killed 6 million Jews and others, uh, somehow or other seem to give people like Stalin and Mao a pass because they were Marxist inspired. The other one is Fidel and Cuba, and I don't know too much about that except that you know the cool kids like to wear Che Guevara T-shirts, but when I read about him, he doesn't seem like he was actually a great guy. These folks just like killing more than I would really be comfortable with. Um, but then, okay, so where do the apologetics come in? Well, if you delve into Marx the way a Marxist scholar would, and I've alluded to this, there is a rather mechanical uh, process by which we're going to get to the the revolution, right? Um, and Marx expected that that the revolution wouldn't happen, for instance, until all of the world that was had become industrial capitalist and exploited and miserable, and that's when you might see a the capitalist the communist revolution that Marx was prophesying. When I think about that, or when I listen to neo-Marxist or Marxist apologists, one of the things that they're going to say is, well, those revolutions, they happened too early. We weren't through all of this period that got us to where you would actually have a proper, successful, workers' revolution. It's a whole lot more believable to me that Marx was a brilliant guy, but he couldn't predict the future and he didn't know as much as he thought he knew, than the then revolutions 100 or 150 years after his death didn't take because we hadn't met all of the conditions. Not only that, if a revolution doesn't go, or it starts and goes sideways, ending up with millions of people dead hardly seems like an acceptable outcome either. And one thing that I've kind of personally wondered about, and so this is me, this isn't other actual theorists or Marxist scholars or anything, if we're all supposedly doing something for the good of the country and the good of the party, as long as that sounds great, as long as everyone who is involved actually really does act for the benefit of the party and the benefit of the country. All you need is one sneaky bastard who aspires to power, who's willing to lie and say, I'm doing this for the good of the party, while in fact they're chasing power themselves. And you've kind of left a door wide open for malfeasance. It's one of the things that it's one of the only reasons I can think of why Cuba goes badly, the Soviet Union goes badly, China goes badly, and North Korea just seems like a disaster. I don't even know if they count as Marxist commies. I don't know if anybody knows anything about North Korea. Nothing gets out of there. If they're all always screwing up, that's sort of a problem. Now, behind all that, I think, okay, so what do we get out of Marx that's good? And I hinted at this a little bit earlier as well. When you think of a family and things are owned in common, or a monastery where things are owned in common, those are situations where common ownership, people working for the common good of the unit, actually seems to work. And it's easier to ensure that the people who are involved are all, in fact, working for the common good. Those are also voluntary associations to a certain extent. Like if you don't like the monastery, you can leave. And one of the things that has intrigued me when you go read the Rule of Saint Benedict, which I think is about the year 400 or so. And Marx is writing in 1800, so a century, a millennia before Marx. It's got a lot of the same ideas that the Communist Manifesto has. Be careful with, you don't want lots of strong personal relationships. You want everyone to be commonly friendly with everyone else, mostly equal relationships, no special friends. You don't have personal property. You work according to the need, and you work according to your ability, and you take according to your need. And in that world, the old monks who are worn out, they're taken care of. The young monks are working and supporting things in your families. Grandma may, especially an old-fashioned multi-generational household, grandma can help watch the kids, even if she can't, hold down a labor job. Mom and dad can be out working, and the kids can help around the house with the chores, and everybody works together, and you achieve this common thing. Without being too stereotypical, I can imagine that that probably wasn't all that uncommon for small, old-fashioned tribal groups. I can't imagine it. I don't think it would work for big groups, but small clan and kin, I think you would see as well. And so you do see these pictures of where, these like kind of glimpses and hints of where that kind of common ownership would work. It's just not big industrial modern societies. It doesn't mean big industrial modern societies don't have problems at all. And that leads to the other element of what Marx is getting at, is whether you like his model or not, whether you're looking forward to the communist revolution or not, or even if you're a hardcore free marketer, simply approaching the whole of society and asking yourself, what are the tensions within that group? What are the fractures which are pushing it apart? We'll get to Durkheim later, but because Durkheim's model is in some ways very similar to Marx's, but inverse. Marx's model is kind of centrifugal. When the world is spinning, things want to fly apart. And Marx is asking, what's causing things to fly apart? Well, Durkheim's model, which we'll explain or get into later, is really one of, okay, but why is the world holding together? Like what keeps things from falling apart? So if Marx is what are the centrifugal forces on a society, Durkheim's going to be what are the centripetal forces on society, the pieces holding it together. That's what I have for Marx now. I'll see if I think of anything else, and if anybody has any questions, maybe we can cover those at a later date. Thank you.